The massive training room was quiet except for the soft hum of alien technology. Commander Vexitara stood in the center, her tall frame casting shadows on the metal walls. Her skin looked like blue crystal, and her forearms moved with the grace of someone who had trained warriors for over 200 years. She was the best combat trainer in the Zephyrian Empire, and everyone knew it. Today was different, though. Today she would meet her first human. Vextara had read the files about this new species called humans. They came from a small blue planet called Earth, far away from the center of the galaxy. The report said they were young, weak, and had only just learned to travel between stars. Most alien species needed at least 1,000 years to develop proper space travel, but humans had done it in less than 50. That was strange, but Vextara did not think much about it. The door to the training room opened with a soft hiss. A human male walked in, wearing a simple gray uniform. He was shorter than Vextara, with brown hair and dark eyes. His name was Jake Morrison, and he was supposed to be some kind of captain in the human military. He looked ordinary to Vextara. No claws, no extra arms, no thick skin or sharp teeth. Just a regular-looking creature with soft flesh and a calm expression. Captain Morrison, Vextara said in perfect English. All good trainers learned many languages. Welcome to the Nexus Prime training facility. I am Commander Vexitara, and I will be testing your combat abilities today. Jake nodded and looked around the room. His eyes took in every detail, the strange machines, the glowing panels on the walls, the circular platform in the center where the fighting would happen. Thank you, Commander. I am ready to begin whenever you are. Vexitara liked that. No complaints, no questions about why the test was necessary, no fear about facing an alien warrior. Just simple acceptance. Maybe this human was not completely hopeless after all. Before we start, Vextara explained, let me tell you about our system. This is a neural combat simulator. It will put your mind into different battle situations while keeping your body safe. You will feel everything, pain, fear, exhaustion, but you cannot actually die or be permanently hurt. The test will measure how well you fight, how smart you are in battle, and how long you can keep going before you give up. Jake listened carefully, nodding at the right times. When Vextara finished explaining, he asked, how many rounds do most species complete? 3, Vexitara replied. The first round is basic combat in a simple environment. The second round adds more enemies and obstacles. The third round is quite difficult. Most beings ask to stop after the third round because their minds become too tired to continue safely. And after 3 rounds, the test is over. Yes, 3 rounds is enough to judge combat ability for most species. Jake smiled slightly. It was not a nervous smile or a worried smile. It looked almost like he was looking forward to something fun. Understood. Should I get into that machine now? Vexitara gestured toward the neural interface pod, a chair-like device covered in strange wires and glowing sensors. Jake walked over and sat down without hesitation. Most beings needed several minutes to work up the courage to enter the simulator. Some refused entirely, saying they were not ready, but Jake simply sat down and waited for instructions. Close your eyes and relax, Vexitara said, as she began connecting the neural wires to Jake's head. The simulator will read your brain patterns and create a world around you. Remember, everything you experience will feel completely real, but it is just a test. If you want to stop at any time, just say the word terminate, and the simulation will end immediately. Jake closed his eyes. I understand. Vextara activated the system. Lights flashed across the control panel as the machine scanned Jake's brain and began building the first simulation. On her monitoring screen, she could see what Jake was experiencing. He was standing in a ruined city, surrounded by broken buildings and abandoned vehicles. Enemy soldiers were moving through the streets hunting for him. His mission was simple: survive for 20 minutes and reach the extraction point on the other side of the city. Most species approached this scenario carefully. They would hide, move slowly, avoid fights when possible, and focus on staying alive until time ran out. It was the smart approach, and Vexitara always praised beings who showed such wisdom. Jake did something different. Instead of hiding, he immediately began moving toward the enemy positions. Instead of avoiding fights, he seemed to be looking for them. Vexitara watched in surprise as Jake picked up a broken piece of metal from the ground and used it as a weapon. When an enemy soldier spotted him, Jake did not run away. He charged forward and attacked. The fighting was brutal and fast. Jake moved with surprising speed and hit with unexpected force. But what really caught Vexitara's attention was his attitude. Most beings in their first simulation showed signs of stress, fear, or confusion. Their heart rates increased, their breathing became rapid, and their brain patterns showed anxiety. Jake's vital signs were completely calm. His heart beat steadily, his breathing was controlled, and his brain patterns showed focus and determination. It was like he was enjoying himself. The simulation continued. Jake fought his way through the city, taking on multiple enemies at once, using the environment to his advantage, and never once slowing down or asking for help. When he reached the extraction point, he had completed the mission in just 15 minutes, 5 minutes faster than the average time for most species. The simulation ended and Jake opened his eyes. He looked completely normal, not tired or stressed at all. He smiled at Vexitara and said, "That was interesting. What comes next?" Vexitara stared at him for a moment. In all her years of training different species, she had never seen anyone complete the first round so easily. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Fine," Jake replied. "Ready for round 2. Something cold moved through Vexitara's chest. This human was not like the others she had trained. This human was something different, entirely. Vexitara looked at Jake with new interest. His calm smile and steady breathing made her feel uneasy. She had trained thousands of warriors from dozens of different species, but none of them had acted like this human. They showed fear, excitement, or at least some sign that the simulation had affected them. Jake acted like he had just finished a pleasant walk. "Very well," Vexitara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We will begin the second round. This simulation is much harder than the first. It will test your ability to handle multiple threats. At the same time," Jake nodded and settled back into the neural interface chair. "I am ready." Vexitara hesitated for a moment. The second simulation was designed to challenge experienced soldiers. It usually made new species panic or give up within the first 10 minutes. But something about Jake's confidence made her think he might surprise her again. She activated the program. This time, Jake found himself on an alien planet with purple skies and strange rock formations. The air was toxic, so he had to wear a breathing mask that limited his vision. The gravity was heavier than Earth normal, making every movement more difficult. Enemy creatures moved through the landscape, some flying, some crawling, some that could become invisible. Jake's mission was to cross the dangerous terrain and destroy 3 enemy bases while avoiding or defeating the hostile creatures. Most species took at least an hour to complete this simulation, and many never finished at all. Vexitara watched Jake's vital signs as the simulation began. Again, his heart rate stayed calm, and his breathing remained steady. She saw him look around, the alien environment, taking in the purple sky, the heavy gravity, and the strange sounds of unknown creatures in the distance. Instead of being scared or confused, Jake seemed curious. He started moving immediately, not toward the first base but toward a group of the invisible creatures that most beings tried to avoid. Vexitara watched in amazement as Jake picked up rocks and threw them in different directions, listening to the sounds they made when they hit things. When a rock hit one of the invisible creatures, Jake immediately attacked that spot. The creature became visible when it was hurt, revealing a 6-legged beast with sharp claws and poison spines. Jake did not back away. Instead, he grabbed a large piece of the purple rock and used it to fight the creature. The battle was quick and brutal, ending with the creature dead and Jake barely breathing hard. But what happened next surprised Vexitara even more. Jake did not just move on to his mission. He spent time examining the dead creature, learning about its claws, its poison, and how its invisibility worked. Then he used parts of the creature to make himself better weapons and tools. Impossible, Vextara whispered to herself. No other species had ever thought to do that. Jake continued through the simulation, fighting creatures that were bigger and stronger than him. But he never fought them the same way twice. He learned from each battle and used that knowledge in the next fight. When he faced flying creatures, he found ways to bring them down to the ground. When he fought creatures with thick armor, he found their weak spots. When he encountered creatures that hunted in groups, he found ways to make them fight each other instead of him. The first enemy base was heavily defended by robot guards. Most species would try to sneak past them or find a way around. Jake studied the robots for several minutes, then did something that made Vexitara's secondary heart skip a beat. He walked straight up to the largest robot and started a fight with it. But this was not a normal fight. Jake was not trying to destroy the robot. He was trying to learn how it worked. He let it attack him, dodging at the last second to see how fast it could move. He hid it in different places to see which parts were strongest. He was using the robot as a teacher. When Jake finally destroyed the robot, he had learned everything he needed to know about how all the robots worked. The rest of the base fell quickly as Jake used his new knowledge to defeat the remaining guards with ease. The second and third bases were even more challenging, with more creatures, more robots, and more dangerous traps. But by now Jake had learned so much about the alien environment that nothing could stop him. He moved through the obstacles like he had been born on that strange planet. When the simulation ended, Jake had completed all objectives in just 45 minutes. The average time for species that actually finished was 2 hours. Most never finished at all. Jake opened his eyes and looked at Vextara with the same calm smile. That was much more interesting than the first round. The invisible creatures were a nice touch. Vextara stared at him. Her 4 hands were shaking slightly and she could feel her crystal skin changing color with stress. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Great," Jake replied. "I learned a lot about adaptive combat techniques. Is there a third round?" Vexitara's mind raced. The third simulation was not really meant to be completed. It was designed to test the absolute limits of a being's will to survive. It was called the Nightmare Scenario, and it had broken the spirit of some of the strongest warriors in the galaxy. But looking at Jake's eager expression, Vextara realized that this human did not understand the concept of limits. To him, each challenge was just another puzzle to solve, another opportunity to learn something new. "Yes," Vexitara heard herself saying, "there is a third round. But Captain Morrison, I must warn you, this simulation is extremely difficult. It has caused permanent psychological damage to some beings. Are you certain you want to continue?" Jake's smile grew wider. "Commander, I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Against every instinct she had developed over 2 centuries of training warriors, Vexitara began preparing the nightmare scenario. Vexitara's hands moved slowly across the control panel. She had only activated the nightmare scenario 12 times in her entire career. 7 of those beings had to be pulled out of the simulation when their minds began to break. 3 had finished, but never recovered mentally. 2 had died from the shock even though the simulation was supposed to be safe. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice more serious than it had been all day, "I need you to understand something. This third simulation is not like the others. It was designed by our best military scientists to test the absolute breaking point of a warrior's mind. It will push you beyond anything you can imagine." Jake looked at her with those calm brown eyes. "What makes it so different?" Vextara struggled to find the right words. "It changes reality around you. The laws of physics do not work the same way. Your enemies can do things that should be impossible. The environment itself will try to kill you in ways that make no sense. Many beings who enter this simulation come out believing that reality itself cannot be trusted. And you think I should not try it? I think," Vexitara said carefully, "that you should know the risks. Some warriors have never been the same after experiencing the nightmare scenario." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled again. "Commander, I appreciate your concern, but I came here to learn about my limits. How can I do that? If I stop before I reach them?" Against her better judgment, Vexitara activated the program. The nightmare scenario began gently, which was part of what made it so terrible. Jake found himself in a normal-looking human city, with familiar buildings, and streets that reminded him of Earth. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and everything seemed peaceful. Then the reality shifts began. The first change was small. Jake was walking down a street when he noticed that his shadow was moving wrong. Instead of following his movements, it was walking in a different direction. When he stopped, his shadow kept walking. When he turned left, his shadow turned right. Most beings would panic at this point. Their minds would struggle to understand how something so basic as a shadow could behave incorrectly. But Jake just watched his shadow with interest, like it was a new puzzle to solve. The changes came faster after that. Buildings began to grow and shrink randomly. Streets that had been straight became twisted into impossible shapes. The sky changed color every few seconds, cycling through colors that had no names. Enemy creatures appeared, but they were not normal creatures. They were things that could not exist in real physics. A creature made of living fire that could freeze, things with its touch. A beast with no body that could still attack with invisible claws. Monsters that could be in two places at the same time. Jake fought them all. What amazed Vextara was how quickly Jake adapted to each impossible situation. When gravity suddenly reversed and he began falling upward, he did not panic. He used the strange gravity to attack enemies from angles they could not expect. When time began moving backward and forward randomly, Jake learned to predict the changes and use them to his advantage. The simulation threw more challenges at him. He had to fight enemies while the ground beneath his feet turned to liquid. He had to navigate a maze where the walls kept changing position. He had to survive in a place where breathing caused pain but not breathing caused death. Each challenge should have broken his mind. Each impossible situation should have made him give up or go insane. But Jake kept fighting, kept learning, kept adapting. Hours passed. Vexitara watched Jake die in the simulation 17 times. Each death was horrible and strange. He was crushed by gravity that suddenly became too strong. He was torn apart by creatures made of sound. He was dissolved by rain that fell upward. But each time he died, the simulation reset and he began again. And each time he learned something new. By the 15th death, Jake had figured out how to predict when gravity would change. By the 17th death, he had learned to fight creatures that existed in multiple dimensions at once. He was not just surviving the nightmare scenario. He was mastering it. Vextara felt something she had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of Jake, but fear for him. No mind should be able to handle this much impossible reality without breaking. But Jake's brain pattern showed no signs of stress or confusion. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying the challenge. On his 18th attempt, Jake did something that made Vexitara's blood run cold. Instead of just trying to survive, he began to experiment with the broken reality around him. He started using the impossible physics as weapons. When time moved backward, he used it to undo enemy attacks. When gravity reversed, he used it to launch himself at flying creatures. He was not just adapting to the nightmare scenario. He was making it work for him. The simulation was designed to last 4 hours. Jake completed it in 2 hours and 37 minutes. When it ended, he had achieved objectives that the creators of the scenario had thought were impossible. Jake opened his eyes and looked at Vexitara. His breathing was slightly faster than normal and there was sweat on his forehead, but his expression was one of pure excitement. "That was incredible," he said. "The way reality could be manipulated in there, it opens up so many possibilities. For combat tactics, do you have any more advanced scenarios?" Vextara stared at him in complete silence. Her mind could not process what she had just witnessed. A being had not only survived the nightmare scenario, but had enjoyed it, had learned from it, had asked for more. "Captain Morrison," she whispered, "what are you?" Vextara could not sleep that night. She kept thinking about Jake's question. "Do you have any more advanced scenarios?" The way he had asked it, like a child asking for more candy, made her feel cold inside. She had thrown everything at him. Impossible physics, reality-bending enemies, psychological torture disguised as combat training. And he wanted more. She spent hours reviewing the recordings of Jake's performance. Every time she watched him adapt to a new, impossible situation, she felt more confused. This should not be happening. No species in the galaxy could handle reality distortion like that. The Zephyrian Empire had tested thousands of different beings over centuries of expansion, and they all had limits. They all broke eventually, but not Jake Morrison. The next morning, Jake arrived at the training facility exactly on time. He looked well-rested and eager, like someone looking forward to a fun day of activities. Vextara, on the other hand, had dark circles under her crystal blue eyes and her hands shook slightly from exhaustion. "Good morning, Commander," Jake said cheerfully. "I have been thinking about yesterday's training all night. I have some ideas about how those reality manipulation techniques could be used in real combat situations." Vextara stared at him. "You have been thinking about the nightmare scenario?" "Yes, the way space and time could be bent in there. It suggests that with the right technology, a small force could defeat a much larger enemy by using impossible tactics. Have your people ever tried to build weapons based on those principles?" The question hit Vextara like a physical blow. Jake was not just surviving impossible situations, he was learning from them and thinking of ways to make them real. This was beyond anything she had encountered before. "Captain Morrison," she said slowly, "the nightmare scenario is not based on real technology. It is designed to test mental limits by showing impossible things. None of it can actually be built or used in real combat." Jake tilted his head slightly like he was considering this information. "But some of the basic principles could work, right? I mean, if you can simulate something in a neural interface, there must be some mathematical foundation for it." Vextara felt her secondary heart skip. Jake was asking questions that military scientists in the Zephyrian Empire had spent decades trying to answer. Questions about the theoretical limits of physics and whether the impossible could be made possible. "Think," she said carefully. "We should continue with more conventional training today." But Jake had other ideas. "Actually, I was hoping we could work on some of the combat forms you showed me yesterday, the ones your people use in real battles." Vextara had demonstrated a few basic Zephyrian fighting techniques, while Jake was between simulations. They were simple forms that took most Zephyrian children years to learn properly. She had shown them as examples of how different species developed different fighting styles. "Those forms require years of practice," Vextara explained, "and they are designed for Zephyrian physiology. Your body structure is completely different. Can I try anyway?" Against her better judgment, Vextara agreed. She moved to the center of the training room and began demonstrating the flowing crystal form, a sequence of movements that used all four arms in a complex pattern. The form was beautiful and deadly, requiring perfect balance and timing. Jake watched carefully, his eyes tracking every movement. When Vextara finished, he stepped forward and attempted the form himself. His first try was clumsy, as expected. His two arms could not replicate the four-armed movements exactly, but instead of giving up or asking for an easier form, Jake began to modify the techniques. He found ways to use his legs and body rotation to compensate for having fewer arms. He changed the timing to work with human reflexes instead of Zephyrian ones. By his 10th attempt, Jake had created something new. It was not exactly the flowing crystal form, but it was not completely different either. It was a hybrid technique that combined Zephyrian principles with human adaptations. Vextara watched in growing amazement as Jake continued to practice. Each repetition was better than the last. He was not just copying her movements, he was understanding the philosophy behind them and making them work for his own body. Other crew members began to notice what was happening in the training facility. Word spread quickly through the ship that the human was doing something impossible. Off-duty personnel found excuses to walk past the training room, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange visitor. By the end of the day, Jake had mastered 3 different Zephyrian combat forms and was working on a 4th. What should have taken years of dedicated study he accomplished in hours. More than that, his adaptations were so clever that Vextara found herself taking notes on his techniques. "How are you doing this?" she finally asked when Jake paused for a water break. Jake looked surprised by the question. "Doing what?" "Learning these forms so quickly, understanding the principles behind them, making them work for your physiology." Jake thought for a moment. "I guess I just try to understand why something works instead of just memorizing how to do it. Once I understand the why, I can figure out different ways to achieve the same result." It was such a simple explanation, but it revealed something profound about human thinking. Most species learned by copying exactly what they were taught. Humans learned by understanding and then creating their own solutions. That night, Vexitara sent a priority message to Zephyrian High Command. Her report was brief but urgent. Request immediate consultation with senior military advisors. Human combat. Capabilities exceed all known parameters. Recommend complete review of species classification protocols. The response came back within hours. Report confirmed for authenticity. Sending specialist team immediately. Continue observation and testing. Do not let human leave facility until further notice. Vextara felt a chill run through her crystal skin. High Command was taking this seriously, very seriously. And that meant Jake Morrison was about to become the most important being on the ship. 3 days later, the Nexus Prime received visitors that made the entire crew nervous. General Kexthera arrived with a team of the most experienced military minds in the Zephyrian Empire. These were beings who had fought in wars across the galaxy, who had studied combat for longer than most species had existed. Jake noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. The crew members who had been friendly before now avoided eye contact. Guards appeared in corridors where none had been before. Even Vextara seemed different, more formal and distant. "Captain Morrison," she said when he arrived for training that morning, "today will be different. General Kexithera wishes to observe your abilities personally." The general was enormous, even by Zephyrian standards. Her crystal skin was dark, purple, almost black, marked with scars from countless battles. Her forearms were thick with muscle, and her eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who had seen too much war. "So this is the human," General Kexithera said, her voice deep and commanding. "He looks ordinary enough," Jake smiled politely. "General, it is an honor to meet you." The general studied him like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "Commander Vextara tells me you have shown unusual combat abilities. I have designed some tests that will help us understand exactly what those abilities are." What followed was unlike anything Jake had experienced before. The general did not use the standard training simulations. Instead, she created scenarios based on real battles that had shaped galactic history. These were not training exercises. They were recreations of actual wars where millions had died. The first scenario was the Battle of Kepler 442, where 12,000 Zephyrian warriors had fought against impossible odds to defend their colony from invasion. It was considered one of the greatest military victories in galactic history, studied in war colleges across dozens of worlds. Jake entered the simulation not as a student, but as the commanding officer of the defending forces. He had to make the same impossible decisions that had faced the original Zephyrian commanders centuries ago. General Kexithera expected Jake to follow the historical tactics that had barely won the battle. Instead, Jake did something that made the entire observation team gasp in shock. He ignored the historical strategy completely and created his own plan. Jake studied the enemy formations for only a few minutes, then began issuing orders that seemed insane. He pulled troops back from defensive positions that military doctrine said were essential. He sent small groups to attack areas that seemed unimportant. He divided his forces in ways that should have led to certain defeat. But Jake saw something the original commanders had missed. The enemy army had a weakness in their supply lines that could be exploited if someone was willing to take enormous risks. Jake was willing. His strategy worked perfectly. Not only did he win the battle, but he won it in half the time it had taken the original army. More importantly, He achieved objectives that the historical battle had failed to accomplish completely. D. Observation room was silent when the simulation ended. General Kexathera stared at the tactical display, her 4 hands clenched into fists. In 40 minutes, this human had found flaws in a battle plan that Zephyrian military historians had studied for centuries. Run it again, the general ordered. They ran the simulation 5 more times, each time with different parameters and challenges. Jake won every single battle, each time using completely different tactics. He adapted to every change instantly, as if he could see patterns that were invisible to everyone else. But the most disturbing part was not just that Jake won. It was how he won. His strategies were creative, unpredictable, and effective in ways that challenged everything the Zephyrian military thought they knew about warfare. After the 6th victory, General Kexathera called for a break. She gathered her advisors in a private room, leaving Jake alone with Vextara. "How do you think I did?" Jake asked, genuinely curious about her opinion. Vextara looked at him with something between fear and wonder. "Jake, do you understand what you just accomplished? Those battles are considered masterpieces of military strategy. Our greatest generals study them for decades, and you just improved on all of them." Jake seemed surprised. "Really? They felt like straightforward tactical problems to me. The solutions were pretty obvious once I understood the overall situation." The word obvious hit Vextara like a physical blow. Strategies that had taken genius-level military minds years to develop were obvious to this human. When General Kexathera returned, her expression was grim. "Captain Morrison, my government has asked me to make you an offer. We would like you to stay with us and help improve our military training programs. In exchange, we can offer you advanced technology, a high rank in our forces, and access to the best military education in the galaxy." Jake considered this for a moment. "That is a generous offer, General, but I cannot accept it." "Why not?" The general's voice was sharp with surprise. "Because I am not just representing myself here. I am representing humanity. And my people need to know what I have learned." Jake smiled. "Besides, I am not the only human with these abilities. There are billions more like me back on Earth." The silence that followed was deafening. General Kexathera's face went pale, and several of her advisors stepped backward, as if Jake had just announced he was carrying a deadly disease. "Billions?" Vextara whispered. "Oh yes," Jake said cheerfully. "I am pretty average by human standards. There are many who are much better at this kind of thing than I am." General Kexathera activated her communicator with shaking hands. "Priority message. To High Command. Recommend immediate diplomatic contact with human government. Suggest full alliance protocols. Urgent." She looked back at Jake with new respect and barely controlled fear. "Captain Morrison, I think we need to discuss your people's membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition more seriously." Jake nodded. "I would be happy to help with those discussions, but first, do you have any more training scenarios? I feel like I am just getting started."